Hello and welcome to the Gardening for Change podcast, where we talk about our community's social and environmental climate and what we can do to change it. I'm Annalise.
And I'm Erin. Today, in honor of the upcoming election, we are going to be talking about the importance of young people voting, and we'll be joined by Dr. Casey Dominguez, a political science professor at USD. So Dr. Dominguez, can you tell us about yourself, how you got involved in political science, what you do at USD, and what makes you passionate about politics?
Sure. When I was a little kid, I always liked to read the newspaper, and I loved to follow political campaigns. And there was really never any question that I would do something in politics, but I didn't know what. In high school, I was the editor of my school newspaper, and then I went to college, and I was pretty sure I was going to major in political science. But like I said, I didn't know what I wanted to do with that. So then I went and I did some internships, and I interned at the California State Assembly, and I interned at the White House. And I decided that I didn't really like the kind of people who were there, and that was really not my vibe. But I really did like writing research papers for my classes. Some people told me that maybe I ought to be an academic. And so that's when I went and got a PhD in political science at UC Berkeley. For the last 16 years, I've been teaching college students about the American political system.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's amazing. Can you tell us about USD Votes and how you brought it to campus through this program?
Yeah, so a couple of years ago, I began to feel like it's very hard for young people to vote. It's very hard for college students to vote. The thing about young people is everything's new, right? The process of voting, filling out the paperwork to register to vote, the going to the place and getting a ballot and going in and like saying, I'm here to vote, what do I do, right? It's all novel and a little intimidating, not the least of which is you get to decide who the mayor's going to be and who the governor is going to be and who the president's going to be. And who are you? You're only 17, 18 years old. And so it's, for the first time getting into the process, it can be very intimidating. And that's one of the reasons why it takes a much longer time for young people to generally work their way into the political system. It usually winds up being older people that vote more. But that's really a shame because young people also have a stake in things like how much college costs and what is the climate going to be like in 50 years and how big is the national debt. And no matter what issues you care about, young people also have an enormous stake in what government does. And so the research suggests that, part of the way that we can work on that and get more young people to participate is by reducing the information costs, right? Making it easier for young people to know when and where to vote. And so that's what my organization USD Votes is about at the college I teach at. We're not trying to persuade people really that voting is important, although it is, and there's lots of ways to persuade people of that. And we're not trying to tell people who to vote for. We're just trying to make it easier for for first-time voters in college to know, like, literally, what do I do? What do I do to vote? When do I fill out the forms? Where do I fill it out? Can I do that with my college dorm address? What is the process? So we're just trying to make it easier. And we know that making it easier means more people will do it.
That's great. Thank you. What are some ways to help remove these barriers discussed to young people in politics?
Well, one way to remove these barriers is to take some of the steps that California is already taking. California is making it easier to register to vote by making it available online and also making it eliminating the registration deadline. So you can pre-register first if you're 16 and 17, and that helps a lot. That eliminates that first step. But you can also, if something has gone wrong and you're not registered, you can register all the way up until election day itself. And there's a number of states that have moved to what's called automatic voter registration, and that makes it much easier because, believe it or not, there's a lot of people who just don't think much about the election until the election comes. And in some states, if you haven't registered to vote a month ago, then you can't vote. So allowing people to register to vote on election day itself opens up the door to a lot more people. So that's one thing that can be easier for young people and other people as well. The pre-registration in California helps with that. Online registration helps with that. I think the more radical step and the next logical step would be to lower the voting age and allow 16-year-olds to register and vote. because then you could learn all this stuff in a high school civics class, right? They could just walk you through the process, and you could go through the voting process with your peer group in high school before you get uprooted from your community and go off to some college where you don't know anybody. So I think that's the more radical step, and it would be a good step.
That makes a lot of sense. So why do you think it's important for citizens to become engaged in politics?
Well, there's two choices, right? Either you don't participate and people like you don't participate, or you do. If you do participate, well, sometimes you're going to win, sometimes you're going to lose, and sometimes you're not going to be in love with the people who are running your city or representing you in the state legislature, and it's just like, oh, okay, I'm going to make some choices and I'm not going to get everything I want. And that's sort of a positive, healthy attitude toward democratic participation. The alternatives to that are you don't participate, nobody like you participates, and then, well, somebody else is still making all the decisions, right? And that somebody else may not have your values, may not have the interests of people like you or people that you care about in mind when they're voting. And so then the system is going to reflect the views and preferences of the people who show up. And if you are not one of those people who shows up, and if the people like you don't show up, if young people don't show up to vote, then your preferences will be ignored. And you have preferences, and you should feel confident about those preferences. 40% of people under the age of 30 were protesting in the street this summer for racial justice. And I find that just so inspiring and really so historic. Those are just such amazing numbers. But like, if young people with those values vote at really high rates, that will change who's in power, and it'll change who the people in power have to listen to and take their perspectives into account. Right now, old people vote, and that's great, but they're the ones at the moment who have free health insurance and free and a pension. They're on like public social security, and they get that because they vote. And young people, are burdened with expensive college and a degraded environment, and part of the reason for that is that they aren't reliable voters. And so politicians don't have to take their wishes into account. The world could change very quickly if people under 40 voted at higher rates.
Thank you for that insightful response about voting.
So why is voting in particular important?
It's a big responsibility. Voting is a big responsibility. But you guys are already, good students. You already know how to read. You know how to do some simple math. You might say to yourself, well, grown-ups know so much more about these things. I hate to break it to you, but they don't. Only 27% of American adults can name the 3 branches of government. Most people can't find the state of Massachusetts on a map. 90% of Americans don't know who the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court is. If you know any of those things, you are at least as qualified to vote as most adults. So, time to develop a little bit of self-confidence and participate as soon as you're old enough to do so.
Well, that's very inspiring for young people and very concerning for the rest of the country.
I agree. Yes. Do you think it's a product of politicians not really catering to young people's values? Young people don't feel the need to participate?
Well, they have no reason to cater to young people's values because young people don't show up to vote. So it's this chicken and egg problem. But the politicians think about their self-interest, right? They are elected, want to get elected. So they're going to look to appeal to the people that they know will reliably show up to vote. Young people also don't have a lot of other resources, right? It's not like you're giving campaign donations. So voting is really your political power. And if you're not using it, they're not going to pay attention to you. So I think it starts with you. It starts with the young people. Politicians will listen when you are a force to be reckoned with.
That's a really good point. So how do you register to vote?
So if you are a Californian, when you can pre-register to vote, you can go to the California Secretary of State's website or the San Diego County Registrar of Voters website. And if you are 16, you can sign up and pre-register to vote. You can also pick up a paper form. Really, for you guys, online is the easiest way to do it. So that's the easiest way to do it. And I don't have that link at my fingertips, but maybe you could put it in the notes of your podcast.
So how can we get people in our social circles and communities to register to vote?
Well, it's if you know somebody who's 18, you could just flat out ask them, hey, are you registered to vote? And if they say no, you can ask them why not. Sort of make that part of the conversation. And you can explain how to make it easy for them. You can be like, oh, I have the link right here. Can I text it to you? Reduce those costs, make it easier. Or you could say, so you could develop social pressure, say, oh, wow, I can't wait to be 18 so I can vote. Developing the social pressure, like it's expected. Oh boy, are you 18? Have you registered to vote? Do you get to vote this year? Like creating social pressure and excitement about it. And the expectation that is what you do when you turn 18. And 17, if the initiative on the California ballot passes, you'll be able to vote in a primary at the age of 17. So those are all good ways, I think, to pressure people in your own social circles. And I would say also, don't let people get away with the casual cynicism about how the political system doesn't work and nobody's ever going to listen to us. That is a bill of lies that makes people feel like they have no political power. Our political system requires a little bit of hope, right? If you believe in democracy, then democracy can work for the people. But if you believe that it doesn't work, then unfortunately, it is going to work for those who show up, and that's going to be special interests and people who you may not agree with.
That's a great note.
So, what caused the record voter turnout of young people this year? What is the source of that?
I think it's probably the president, right? Young people under 40 are, to the left of the president, have pretty progressive social values, are more diverse and more educated than prior generations. And all of that combined means that on average, younger people are sort of against this particular president. And his behavior has motivated a lot of people to turn out to vote in 2018. And we shall see. But the turnout so far among young people looks really good for 2020.
I hope it continues.
I do as well. Do you think that the coronavirus pandemic has had something to do with a lot of people getting angry about our current administration?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, honestly, the public opinion had basically turned against the president even before the pandemic started, but the pandemic has caused even more people to turn against him a bit.
Yes, definitely. And then some young people believe that they don't really have the power or aren't represented enough already, so why should they even bother? So what would you say to such young people who don't think that they are smart enough to be able to vote?
I would say that you are smart enough. We do not have intelligence or literacy or any other kind of test in this country. We believe that once you turn 18, that you are a capable citizen. And while when you think about it, that might not be the world's best rule in some respects, that is our rule. And so by definition, you are ready to vote when you are 18. You have a high school degree or very close to it if you're still in your senior year of high school. And that's what most people have, right? Only a third of Americans go to college. So 2/3 of Americans don't go to college. So by the time you are done with high school, you are as qualified as most voters.
I agree. That's a great note.
So what forms of activism are most effective in reaching out to young people?
I don't know. That's a question for you guys. How do you reach young people? I have that question all the time when I try to organize events with my students. I think probably social media, right? I mean, in terms of finding students and motivating them, young people are on Instagram and Snapchat, YouTube, podcasts. So those kinds of media are probably the best way to find people and to figure out ways to motivate them. TikTok, I guess.
Definitely TikTok.
Yes, definitely. I've definitely noticed a big change since most of the social justice protests about a lot of people getting more involved in spaces like Instagram and following a lot of different people of color or people who don't look like them or believe the same things that they believe.
Yeah, I mean, that's the healthy way to use it, right? Developing social networks and using social media to inform yourself about things that you don't know as much about, and you think you need to learn a little bit and educate yourself in order to really understand the world. That's, using it for those purposes is great. It's important to also be a good news consumer and not fall down fascist, racist rat holes on the internet.
Yes, that kind of brings us to a little bit of an off-topic question that we were discussing in our meeting last week about surrounding ourselves with just people who believe the same things that we do on social media, because it's a really easy hole to fall into. So what would you kind of advise to have a more diversified social media feed?
I think it's a good idea to diversify your sources of news. There are respectable sources of news that are both on the left side of the spectrum and in the center. And there are some on the right, the Wall Street Journal, for example, or Politico or The Economist, Real Clear Politics. There's some that are slightly right-leaning that will inform you about the world. I also highly recommend PBS, which is a very balanced source of information, the PBS NewsHour. Another way to inform yourself broadly is also to look for international sources of news. Al Jazeera and the BBC, broaden your horizon beyond just what's in the American news.
Thank you. That's a great note. And then that kind of brings us to our last question about this upcoming election. Obviously, we are kind of in the final countdown until November 3rd. So what would you suggest to young voters who can't vote this election to do?
People who can't vote can still participate. You can still work for a campaign for a local office or for a national office. They want text bankers, every candidate in the country trying to run in every race. There's so many inspiring people running for office, and especially with the pandemic, all that stuff's online. So you can go text bank or make phone calls from your house, or get a Zoom party together and make calls together or do text banking together with some friends, and do that for a candidate or a cause that you care about.
Those are all really great ideas.
Yes, thank you.
So I think that's it. Thank you so much for coming onto our podcast for our opening episode and talking to us about young people in politics.
Thanks for inviting me.
Of course. And of course, thank you all for listening. Make sure to tune in to our next podcast coming soon.